Welcome. Thank you for tuning in to our discussion of defining and measuring crime. And when you're working in, law enforcement and studying law and criminology, you try to sort things a little bit to make things easier to understand. And one of the first things to understand when discussing like court cases in law is that there's a big difference between what's called civil law and criminal law. In civil law, I want you to think about lawsuits. Civil law is all about suing someone or settling some sort of dispute, oftentimes very financial. For example, a very common area of civil law is divorce. Divorce proceedings are, people trying to settle some sort of dispute and settle the dissolution of a marriage, essentially. But civil law can be a lot of things. It can be a lawsuit against someone else. Let's say someone, I don't know, ran over your mailbox. You could be suing them over that. Let's say someone died under the care of another individual. You could be suing that individual for wrongful death. You could have a lawsuit about any number of things. I remember many years ago when there was a class action lawsuit which involves many people suing one entity. And it was against Red Bull, in which Red Bull, in their advertisements, had said Red Bull gives you wings, but it doesn't give you actual wings. So people, got into a gigantic lawsuit, a multi-million-dollar lawsuit that Red Bull lost. So that's a civil action. It's a civil law topic, whereas criminal law is going to deal with crimes. And civil law can be a lot of things. I think of like car accidents. If you hit somebody else, they could sue you. They could sue your car insurance for the money to pay for the damages of their car. Now, civil law has some key features that you need to be able to differentiate. First of all, it has the plaintiff. The plaintiff is the person that is doing the suing, and the defendant is the one that is being accused. So they are the one that is being sued. The defendant could be a person, it could be a government entity, it could be a corporation, and the plaintiff could be any of that either, too. So you have two parties here. When we get to a criminal case, the party that's bringing the charges is the government. This is not necessarily the case in civil law. So typically, if it's involving the government, you're suing the government in a civil case. Now, most of the time, you're asking for some sort of monetary damages. If you're suing someone about damage to your car, it's for money. If you're suing someone for, the Red Bull not giving you wings, it's false advertisement, and you want money to compensate for your purchases. If you're suing someone for, wrongful death, it's for financial hardship of some sort. Now, civil law follows a code basically of preponderance of evidence. You may have heard beyond a reasonable doubt, and that's a term used for criminal cases to determine if someone is guilty. Preponderance of evidence is the idea that the court, in the courtroom, in a civil court, you just need to prove that the defendant is more than 50% at fault. So you need to prove that it is mostly their fault or it's most likely their fault, which is a pretty easy thing to prove compared to beyond a reasonable doubt, which we'll get to in a moment. So preponderance of evidence, you're in a courtroom, you're suing someone about they hit your car. You are partially at fault for that because you had your car in that location able to be hit. But if your car was like parked at, Walmart or something like that, and someone just hit it, they are mostly going to be at fault. So they are more than 50% chance at 50% responsible, and you have to show that in the courtroom. Also, you're just trying to prove that it is their fault, and you just have to prove just enough, just 50% chance that they are at fault. So that's an easier, lower bar. And a lot of times civil cases aren't worth going to a full trial. In fact, they'll often have what's called small claims court or arbitration, where really small lawsuits go there. For example, if you're suing someone over like $100, that's probably not worth bringing in a jury and a judge and handling this in a courtroom over a few minutes or an hour. Arbitration will have the two parties, the plaintiff and the defense, meet with an arbitrator, a judge, uh, most likely, and they will settle the dispute in a short amount of time with very little use of the state's money, of the government's money. So arbitration is going to speed things up, and it's going to help you get a resolution much quicker. Now let's talk criminal law. Criminal law is going to be someone committed a crime, and the government is bringing charges against them. So if somebody breaks the law by committing fraud, like Bernie Madoff, he would be brought into the courtroom, and he would have to defend himself, argue that he is not guilty. If someone is you know, charged with a traffic violation, they're accused of of speeding by a government official, by the police department. They can challenge that. They can try to defend themselves in a criminal proceeding. Now, the prosecution is the one bringing the charges. So it's the government bringing charges against a defendant. Uh, and the difference here also, besides just prosecution and plaintiff being different, the difference is they're not necessarily bringing financial charges. They're not necessarily looking for monetary. Certainly, the government can fine people, and that is a monetary penalty. But a lot of times, the government is looking to maybe put someone in jail or prison or um, have the death penalty or force them to forfeit some sort of item. There could be any number of different things that the government demands as a result of a criminal case. And a criminal case is going to be having a higher bar than preponderance of evidence. In a criminal case, you are trying to prove that the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, let's just break that down for a second. That means that you pretty much have to be 100% certain that they did it. So there can't be any reasonable doubt that the person maybe didn't do it. So if you have someone on trial and someone testifies that you know they have an alibi for the defendant, they may have been at this location. That might be enough reasonable doubt that it wasn't them that committed the crime. So your job as a prosecutor is to try and prove that no one else could have committed this crime. And your job as a defendant is to prove that there is some sort of doubt that they could have possibly not done this. And you're going to see some examples of this when we study the O.J. Simpson trial further in class. But don't be afraid to ask about preponderance of evidence and beyond a reasonable doubt. They are important features to know about civil and criminal law. Reminder that criminal law does, we're talking about harsher punishments like jail time as potential, whereas, a civil case isn't necessarily going to have that.